Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
This episode of the Energy Stoners Cafe is sponsored by Passionate World Talk Radio and Lillian Caldwell. PassionateWorldTalkRadio.com. Welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe. My name is Toni Quest, and I'm really happy that you're here. I like to interview the most interesting people I can find on the planet. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and listen. You're going to find that these guests are so intriguing, you'll wonder why you didn't know about them before. Welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe. It is the year 2021. We are into the next decade. Can you believe it? Well, like many people, I'm sure you're reflecting. It's only natural. You're reflecting on your life. Lately, I've been doing some single me talking things because I want to inspire. I want to talk to you about something that's very dear to my heart right now. It's actually a person who taught me something that I did not expect to learn. It goes back a few years when I was starting to teach, and I was teaching gifted and talented students. Now, for those of you that aren't really into education or special education, it was hard for me to believe at the time that special needs students include students that are gifted and talented. Students that are gifted and talented have special needs that most of us are not aware of. So some years ago, I was teaching, or I'd say middle school and high school students that were very good at a lot of things. In order to get into my class, which was an art class on self-actualizing portraiture, they had to excel and get the top grades in their particular class in all subjects, not just art, although they were outstanding artists. But what was really intriguing to me, that they were good in math, they were good at history, they excelled in physics, they excelled in the English language arts. They excelled in everything. But in order for them to get in this class of mine, which was a special class for gifted and talented art students, they had to be good at those other courses. I figured out that the reason they had to be good at those other subjects, and what I've observed over the years, is that the true genius in an individual is the person who all multiple intelligences are kind of balanced. They score the same in that. Their learning style is balanced and equal in everything. There's nothing that really weighs more than the other. I've learned that a lot of people, a lot of us, we assume that if someone's a good artist, that their right brain is highly developed. But what I've learned in doing assessments of students of many ages, especially assessment of students that are, let's say, over the age of 14, and especially students that are over the age of 17, that when I would assess them, I found that they scored an equal score in every single multiple intelligence. They scored very balanced, very equally in their learning style. So if you thought that they were just going to be a visual learner and you didn't think they were going to be a tactile learner or an auditory learner, they would score the same in everything. And then I realized in observing the students and their work that those were the students that I saw as like real geniuses. But getting back to the gifted and talented, that's how I realized that it was important for them to be good in physics, math, science, language arts. When they spoke another language, or they were taking Spanish or French or German, they were just like outstanding students. I was very much awestruck by how talented they were. But nevertheless, they were teenagers, and don't you forget it. Even though they were good at all of those things and they were excellent at it, they were teenagers, and I always had to keep that in mind. So I was teaching them a lot of different things. I was teaching them self-actualizing portraiture, because self-portraiture, I believe, and I learned that I was right in my belief, is really one of the foundations of being a visual artist. You have to be able to depict yourself. And painting the human form is the most difficult thing to do. Now, I just want to clarify everything to let whoever's listening to this, and I want to be transparent in letting you know that I'm self-taught. I've taken very few art classes myself. I'm totally self-taught. So I was always very surprised, and I still am, when people want me to teach a class of art to other students. So these students loved the class. It was Saturday morning that we would gather. They had a whole week's worth of being in school, learning all kinds of things. But I was very flattered as well as surprised to see that they couldn't wait to get there. They couldn't wait to get in the class. So I made it a point of making it very comfortable. It was Saturday. It was their Saturday as well as mine. So they'd show up and I would teach them about self-actualizing portraiture. Self-actualizing portraiture is something that is very dear to me because it's something, once again, I taught myself. Having suffered from PTSD, in my recovery from that and my therapy, physical and emotional and occupational therapy, I was encouraged by my doctors, one of whom was a psychologist. He encouraged me to continue this because when I suffered the PTSD, for some reason, I started drawing these pictures, post-concussion syndrome, post-trauma syndrome. For some reason, I started painting these pictures of women screaming, which ultimately were portraits of myself. So I started teaching the course, and I felt that it's always good to pay it forward. So what I teach myself, I always try to teach other people. It's just what I do. It's the way I am. So I was teaching these students self-actualizing portraiture, and I would give them a specific instruction for every class, also backed up by specific stimuli that I would bring in that I thought would sort of like pique their brains to start getting that creative juice flowing. I also realized that what was happening is that the creative juice was flowing throughout all of them. It became a collective thing. I can't totally explain why and how this happened, but it happened. So teaching this course, I taught them that self-actualizing portraiture would actually be something that they could use in all of their work. Because what I learned as a self-taught artist, whenever you inject a piece of yourself into your work, however you want to do it, you actually move closer to the masterpiece. I was married to a man who passed away, who was a professional artist, and he taught me a lot of things about art. He was taught professionally, and what I learned from him is that one of the mainstays of art instruction, when you go to a school like, let's say, Pratt Institute or School of Visual Arts, or you're majoring in art in some university, you will do a lot of self-portraiture. He shared with me that he took a self-portraiture class when he was in art school, probably at least once a week. And I knew that what I had actually taught myself and what I somehow instinctively started doing after my horrible accident where I suffered from PTSD. So I paid it forward, what I taught myself, to this class. So I was teaching them about taking metaphors and injecting them into their work. So if they would do a self-portrait about themselves, I would bring in an article about something that I might have read in a magazine or in a newspaper or I might have seen online that I thought was very intriguing. And I would bring it in and I would share it with them. I wouldn't discuss my opinion of it, but I would just let them read it. And then I would tell them, use this work. If you can find a metaphor in here that resonates with you, please put it in the form of imagery in your self-portrait. Now, these students were really so smart. They were very astute, highly creative, and highly technical, which is the part that I was so impressed with because I can't really describe myself as a technical artist, but they were, because the art teacher they had from Monday through Friday gave them a lot more, I'll say, fundamentals in terms of instruction with regard to how they learned art. So I guess unconsciously engaged in quantum learning, which is a term I learned way after the fact. So in this class, there were great students in this class, but again, they were teenagers. There was one person in the class, I remember, she was a brilliant artist, and she really was very good at depicting anything. I would say with all due respect to her, and I kind of foresaw her future, that she would be successful. But I saw that she was a little bit lazy. She knew she could, but she just didn't feel like it. And I just let it go. But she was a little bit of a bully in the class. I didn't let her get away with too much. She could bully me, and sometimes she did, and I let her think she was getting away with it. But I didn't really let them get away with bullying each other. There was one particular student that always stood out to me. She was somewhat quiet. She was the peer. She took classes with the other students during the week, and she was really into this form of art that is called anime. It's a form of art that is really kind of like a comic book or a comic strip, and she was developing this story. And I feel so proud because I know she developed this story in my class. I don't remember the exact title of it, but I do remember that it was very dear to her. And what she was doing is depicting characters that were kind of a composite of human, animal, supernatural animal from another planet. Again, they were teenagers, and I watched this thing. It was very fascinating to me. She did it in a very representational way. With regard to the self-actualizing portraiture, the thing that really struck me about her is I would give an assignment. This is what I want you to do today. She would always do it. Boom, it's done. She would do exactly what I told her to do. She didn't give me a lot of heartache. She was always pleasant. She was polite to her classmates, even though not all of them were always polite to her. They all had an element of naivete. They had a lot of book smarts, but she had a high element of naivete. And I believe that there was a shyness about her. And I was sensitive to that. But it was interesting to me that she was quiet, and whatever I told her to do, she did it. I taught in such a way that she could take her passion, which is anime, and her drip, her story, and use what I was teaching within the story. I have to say the brilliance to this day of all of them amazes me. At one point when the class was over and they're graduating, I'm writing recommendation letters to great art schools, and I'll say to myself, and I'll tell you that these students were so great that they got into all of those schools. I don't think it was because of my letter, although I think my letters of recommendation helped because I really, really wanted them to be successful. And they were very successful in terms of the work that they did. So this particular student was going to, I believe, an art school in Manhattan. She got into the school. I always felt really proud for what they did. It wasn't so much that it was about me. It was about me in the fact that what they did was a product of my instruction. You know, to some extent, I'm not going to discount the teachers, the very well-trained teachers that they had within their high school, because I really respect those teachers as well. But the feeling that they needed in order to create a masterpiece and also to put their heart and soul into their work wasn't there because they were very restricted in terms of the work that they did. It was very technical. So I was very surprised at this one student. And in retrospect, I realized I should not have been surprised that she did go to art school and she did well. But then she dropped out, I believe, after the first year, went to a different school, switched majors completely to anthropology. And I'm like, what? So she switched to anthropology. It's not that she wouldn't be good at anything that she did, but she switched majors from art, fine art, to anthropology. And it took me a while to understand it and embrace it. And then after a period of time, she kept in touch with me. And there were maybe 2 or 3 students in that class that continued to stay in touch with me and ask me questions about certain things. And I am to this day very highly flattered, but I'm more proud of them because when I teach anything to anyone, I'll be honest, I'm really investing myself in their success. So this one particular student, her name is Kimmie. So she switched to anthropology. She did very well. She stayed in touch with me. I believe she eventually switched back to art. And I was like, okay. So she's doing a little switching around, a little flip-flopping, and she still was doing very well in school, and she's kept in touch with me. And she graduated. I believe she got her master's degree. She was brilliant, and I would say she's kind of like the unsung hero to me in that class, because I don't think people saw her brilliance. I don't think the students saw their own brilliance the way I saw it. If any of them were listening to them, I want them to know I just love them all, and it was one of the most rewarding periods of my life when I was teaching, because I saw the changes. So Kimmie, when she was learning self-actualizing portraiture, she understood what I was trying to teach. She understood it. She started depicting portraits of herself, self-actualized portraits of herself, committing suicide. And needless to say, I was disturbed. And it was a sort of like a struggle in my mind, because the work that she was putting out was highly representational of herself committing suicide. She would depict herself jumping off of a building, a brick building, and with blood streaking down the building, highly representational, almost like an explosion in process. And she never really hit the ground with those pictures. But going down, you could see it was painful. She would depict pictures of herself, and I'll just tell you about another one. That's when I called my supervisor. When she depicted this portrait of herself standing in a bathtub with the water running, and she's standing in this bathtub with the water filling up. She's standing there as a child, and she depicted herself as a cute little girl holding a radio that was plugged into the adjacent wall. So anyone that knows a little bit of science, if you drop that radio into the water as it's plugged into the wall, that there will be an electrocution. So it was just horrible to me, and I didn't make a big deal about it within the classroom, but I did contact my supervisor about it and her supervisor about it. I even went to my own psychotherapist about the student, like, what am I doing wrong? But my therapist told me that, listen, if she's depicting the image, you don't have to worry as much as you would have to worry if she wasn't drawing anything. And so I did my best not to worry about her. But I was worried. I was concerned. And eventually, the class ended. I think I did 2 years with that. And eventually they graduated and they went on about their merry way. What was interesting also is that Kimmie stayed in touch with me the entire time. She would text me or email me about where she was in school, where she was in her career. One year, some years afterwards, and I would say it was about 6 years later after she had graduated from high school, maybe even more so. She was a woman at this point in her mid-20s. She called me one day when I was in my studio, the way I usually am, listening to jazz, drinking wine with a paintbrush, trying to remember not to dip the paintbrush in the wine. That would be me. She calls me out of the clear blue, and she asked me how I was, and I was very pleased to hear from her. And she said she'd really love to see me, that she is graduated at this point, and she was sort of dodging back and forth from her home and sometimes going to her home country, back and forth on a plane, and that she's fine, and that she did major in anthropology, and that she's working on this comic strip, and at this point, she's hoping to get a job. She said to me it's very hard to get a job in anime in this country, so she went back to her own country. She was going back and forth, but she was still kind of living here in New York. She came to talk to me. She really loved to see my art studio. She never got a chance to see it when I was teaching her. And I said, fine. She came. And I remember it was a regular evening, much like tonight. She came over. I was thrilled to see her. She really developed into this very sophisticated young woman, very sophisticated. And that was very impressive to me. She was always the most mature in the class. She was even more mature now as a grown-up person. And she talked about her life in the same Zen-like quality that she conducted herself when she was in my class. And I would always go home after the class and tell my husband about the students and how they are. And he was an artist as well, and he was a lovely man. And he did remember her from a trip I took. I guess it was a class trip I gave them to the moment. He remembered her and said she was very mature, very polite. I'd say she was the most polite person in that class. So she said, I have some news. And we sat, we talked. She was over 21. And so we had a glass of wine together. And it was kind of nice to do that and talk about art with her. She said to me, she kind of stopped. She says, well, one reason I wanted to see you and see your studio, but I have some news I want to tell you about. And I was like, really? And so I sensed it wasn't good news. And I'm thinking, what's going on, you know? So she told me that her mother died suddenly. And I was like, just shocked. Said that she died on an airplane on her way to Japan and had met her mother. And that's what really shocked me. I remember meeting her mother. I remember thinking to myself that her mother was in my age category, her mother and her father, but they might have been maybe 5 to 10 years younger. But her mother was a young woman. Kimmie's parents really supported her aspirations as an artist or whatever she wanted to do. She was never discouraged from anything she wanted to do, from what I know. And so she said her mother died suddenly on a plane. And I asked what happened, and she said to me, and what was striking is she never shed a tear, but I could feel the grief in her. It was apparent. But she was such a controlled person. She had so much self-control, and she was so respectful of me that I could tell that she wasn't going to burden me with her grief. She just wanted to share it with me, and it wasn't a burden for her to share it with me. So I asked her, what happened? And she says, nobody knows. And I said, will there be an investigation? And she said, no. I said, what happened? She says, I don't understand what happened. It's like the flight attendant came by, I guess to tell her to buckle her seatbelt or whatever, and she was unresponsive, and her mother was dead. Just like that. I asked about her father. She said her father, yeah, he is grieving, but she somehow chose me to share her grief with. And so, to tell you the truth, I cried. I cried, but she didn't. You know, she just wanted me to know. And I think what it was, and this is just what I'm kind of surmising, is she was establishing a relationship with me as the person in her mind that is somewhat of a parent figure. You know, that's the only thing I can say to explain why she chose me. Was there anyone else for her to choose? I didn't want to make her feel more grief-stricken. I'm thinking to myself, is there an aunt? Is there an uncle? Is there a cousin? Is there someone else? No, it's me. And the reason I'm telling this story, and I would really love it if to get feedback from anyone who's listening to this, because I still don't totally understand why she came to me. I still don't totally understand what I could do to help her, or if I helped her. But if anybody's listening to the story and has some insight more than I do, and I'm sure there's someone as to why I was the chosen person, I really want to hear from you. What I'll say is that at this point in time, and this is a few years after she told me that her mother died, we're still friends. And I'm flattered by the fact that she chose me. But I have to say it to anyone who's listening, you never, especially instructors, especially my teaching colleagues out there, you really never know what kinds of seeds you're planting. You really never know what kind of an effect you have on someone's life, especially a young life. Because I was stunned. I was the enrichment teacher. I wasn't the Monday through Friday teacher. I was a self-taught teacher, the self-taught artist, and these other teachers were the people that taught them those specific technical skills. I taught them how to inject themselves into their art. As an educator, I believe that I instilled a trust. Those students to this day, at this point it would be 10 years later at least, I always welcome any kind of feedback that I get from them, any kind of question I get from them, any kind of acknowledgement of their own life's journey. It means more to me than they even know. and I did invest my energy into their future. So I like to know how well they're doing. So anyone that's listening, the message is that everything you do for a student, anything you do for anyone in terms of teaching them or delivering some learning, whether it be your children, your classroom, no matter what the age, it definitely is a seed, especially if they're young. It's a seed that is planted very, very deeply. And that's what I learned when Kimmie came back to visit. Thank you so much for listening to that story. It meant so much to me to experience it, and it means as much to me to share it with you. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time at the Energy Stoners Cafe. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Energy Stoners Cafe.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.